Hi, my name is Scott. I've lived through tinnitus. Mine was stress-induced, multitonal, and reactive. I had hyperacusis, diplacusis, couldn't sleep, and I thought I'd never listen to music again. But over time, I learned how to calm the fear, retrain my attention, and get my life back. Not perfectly, but enough that I don't usually hear the noise anymore. This channel is for people who are stuck in fear, stuck in symptoms, or stuck just not really knowing what's possible. So I'm going to talk about what helped me to get here and what might help you too. So tinnitus ruled my life for 2 years. I've been free for 6. That first year was a war between panic and pretending that everything was normal. It started 8 years ago. One morning I just woke up and it was there. I had had a huge argument the night before and I went to bed really angry, so clearly the cause was stress. I had 3 tones. Some were reactive, and some sounds made it worse. And then hyperacusis came, which is an extreme sensitivity to sound. I couldn't stand the sound of plastic grocery bags being handled. About a month in, I noticed something terrifying. Everything I heard sounded wrong, dissonant. Every sound had this extra note layered on it that sounded like music was being played through a busted karaoke machine. I could hear rhythm just fine, but the notes were warped. That's called diplacusis. And when I Googled it, the first thing that I saw was, for some musicians, it was the end of their career. I panicked. I thought, this is it. This is the end. And it sent me into a spiral. That spiral lasted a few days, but I knew if I didn't stop it, I'd make things worse. So my only option was to stop fighting it. So I let it do its thing. I stopped checking. I stopped Googling. I didn't do that out of bravery. I was just too scared of the alternative. The diplacusis stuck around for a few weeks, but then I noticed that sometimes it was gone. And after about 3 weeks, it vanished. That was my first real experience with habituation, though I didn't know it yet. Turns out that moment taught me a lot about what I'd need to survive the rest of my tinnitus. That first year was hell. I spent night after long night Googling and reading horror stories on support forums. I couldn't sleep. I drank to cope. The volume would spike for days, and then it would get a little bit lower for a couple of days, and then I'd have like a day of complete silence. And then I'd wake up the next morning, and it would be full on hell again. I was a full-time teacher. I couldn't take time off of work to really cope with this. Every day was a battle to function while my brain was screaming. And the worst part was the fear that this was forever. I'd never hear silence again. I'd never be able to go to a metal show again, which is unthinkable for somebody who's been into metal as long as I have. I've been into it since I was like 10 years old. This wasn't my first time facing something this scary. Years earlier, I had beaten chronic pain without drugs or surgery. And I did it by learning how fear and attention can actually amplify symptoms. It's part of something called TMS, which stands for tension myositis syndrome. Dr. John Sarno's work showed that a lot of chronic pain isn't from damage, but from your brain as a way to distract you from painful emotions. That sounds wild, I know, but for me it worked. It didn't cure my tinnitus, but it gave me a path. And the first step on that path was that I had to cut the panic loop. It wasn't easy. I started using a form of mindfulness, not the breathy meditation app kind, but the kind where I started to notice why I was feeling anxious. Most of the time, my mind was on autopilot. It's always been that way. I didn't even know that I was anxious. I was just deep in the thoughts that were creating that anxiety. But once I started catching the emotion first, I was able to start asking, why do I feel this way? The answer was always some version of either ruminating about the past or having catastrophic thoughts about the future. Once I saw that, I could start to see that right now, in this moment, I'm okay. I'm actually safe. And sometimes I would actually imagine my thoughts as being like this wild-eyed prosecutor. And my job was to play the calm defense and build a case. That calmed my anxiety. And when the anxiety dropped, so did the volume of my tinnitus. One of the best things that I ever did to get better, though, was to get off of the tinnitus forums. In the early days, I was reading horror stories every night. I read about people talking about how they couldn't go on. I even remember reading a story about a guy who drove his car off the Golden Gate Bridge and left a note saying that he couldn't take the noise anymore. I learned about a wide variety of the sounds that people have. I read that if you don't get prednisone in the first 2 weeks, then you're screwed. I read that if you've had it for over 2 years, then it's permanent. Also not true, by the way. I read about ototoxic meds. Ototoxic meds are those which can harm your hearing. There's over 700 of those. So I started obsessing about every pill I thought about taking. It destroyed my peace of mind. Forums felt like support, but really they were keeping me stuck. I was addicted to that fear in this weird way, and I was looking for answers that really didn't exist. Getting off those forums didn't just help me heal, it might have saved my life. One of the most maddening things about tinnitus is the endless list of possible causes. I could have spent years chasing them. But I'd already been through that experience with chronic pain. And what I learned back then is that it's really important to rule out anything serious, anything life-threatening. But if doctors can't find a clear physical cause, then it's time to look elsewhere. So I saw a few ENTs and I ruled out hearing loss, acoustic neuroma, anything else that was dangerous. And that gave me some peace. There was no more, well, what if it's this? What if it's that? Once I knew my ears were fine, then I could stop searching, and that helped me stop feeding the fear. Because it was that fear, not the sound itself, that was the real problem. But even after ruling out scary stuff, I still needed help. So I hired a chronic pain coach, even though she'd never worked with tinnitus. One of the first things that she had me do was write out all the evidence that my tinnitus wasn't from some physical cause. She had me consult with a well-known TMS doctor, and I told him everything: symptoms, chronic pain history, what was happening in my life. And ultimately, he said really confidently, "This is TMS, so treat it that way." That one sentence took a huge load off my mind. It gave me a way forward that wasn't endless searching and panic. Then I came across a book by Martin Seligman called Learned Optimism. This book has nothing to do with tinnitus, but it changed everything for me. In the first 2 pages, there's this story about new parents. They bring their baby home, but the baby doesn't respond to sound. The wife stays pretty calm. The husband starts spiraling, thinking, what if the baby's deaf? The wife finds a book that talks about how often newborn babies don't fully respond to things like sound until a week or so has passed. And then she winds up spending her weekend doing the things she normally does. But the husband stays in a panic the whole weekend, and it's not until Monday afternoon, when a passing car backfires and the baby responds, that the husband realizes that the baby's going to be fine. So he wasted his whole weekend in a panic over nothing. That story hit me hard because I was that guy. I lived in worst case scenarios. And that fear was making everything worse for me. That book helped me start changing my brain. It changed how I see everything. I always thought that pessimism was just how I was wired. But the book showed me that mindset can be changed and that pessimism has real consequences. Pessimists tend to have worse health, more problems, and shorter lives. Optimists, on the other hand, live longer, they're happier, they recover better from illness. That also hit me hard because I knew which camp I was in. Seligman spent his entire career as a psychologist studying optimism. He even fathered a field called positive psychology, which, unlike other fields of psychology that look at what's wrong with people and how to fix it, positive psychology is focused on what's right, what makes life worth living, what makes people happy. And that book, Learned Optimism, lays out clear, practical steps to change your mindset. I did the work, and it didn't just help me with my tinnitus. It made me a happier person, period. Sleep was tough in the beginning. I drank a lot just to knock myself out. And even then, I barely slept. But eventually, I found something that helped. I started using these long YouTube videos, 8, 12 hours of videos like streams and forests, beaches, even space music, space type stuff. I'd leave them on all night and just focus on the sounds coming from those videos instead of the tinnitus. Once I was able to stop drinking, I started taking melatonin, just 1 or 2 milligrams, because I learned that that's really enough. It didn't lower the volume, but it did help me fall asleep faster. Later, I learned that you really shouldn't take it long term. It can stop your body from making its own melatonin over time. But for a few weeks, it helped me get over the hump. And once I started sleeping better again, I started to notice that my days started to feel just a little bit easier. For the longest time, I felt like I had to fix the sound. But what finally helped was training my attention. So I started going for long walks in this quiet suburb outside of Shanghai, which was quiet enough that I could hear the birds chirping in the trees and the wind rustling the leaves in the trees. And I'd shift my focus away from the tinnitus toward those sounds. Sometimes I could only do it for a minute or two, but over time I started going 5-10 minutes without hearing the noise at all. I still had bad days, I still cared, I still drank to shut it off sometimes. But I kept going, and eventually refocusing became automatic. I started going whole days, even weeks, without hearing the noise. The sound was still there, but unless I thought about it, it didn't exist. So when I first had tinnitus, I used earplugs quite a bit. Now I only use earplugs when I really need them, like when I'm around construction or if I go to live shows, but not in daily life, not when I go to restaurants, not when I'm on the street. I use these thick yellow ones like this. They're called EAR Classics, and they work great when I need them. But here's the thing. I used to be terrified of sound. I thought every spike meant damage. But my chronic pain experience and Sarno's work taught me something pretty big, which is that fear keeps symptoms alive. If you expect disaster, your brain's going to create one. So I started being careful, but not scared. And the funniest thing happened. In 6 months, my hyperacusis disappeared. I didn't avoid every sound, and as a teacher, I really couldn't, which turned out to be a blessing in disguise. So once I started going days or sometimes weeks without hearing my tinnitus, I noticed that every time I did hear it, it was because I had been talking about it or thinking about it. So I stopped bringing it up in conversation, which helped a lot. But even when I didn't bring it up, other people were constantly coming up to me saying, "Hey, how's your tinnitus lately?" So I politely asked them to stop. I told them if I ever need to talk about it, I will. But otherwise, if I don't say anything, just assume I'm fine. And that helped more than I expected. Because habituation isn't just about training your attention. It's also about out of mind, out of ears. So I beat 2 years of chronic pain using Sarno's TMS approach. But tinnitus was a different beast. With pain, I could at least lay down or sit down or shift positions. But tinnitus was 24/7. It was loud. It was inescapable. It messed with my focus. I couldn't think straight. Journaling wasn't helping like it did before. I knew I was missing something. So I hired a coach who was trained in chronic pain, not tinnitus. There really were no tinnitus coaches back then that I was aware of. But I already suspected that my tinnitus was another form of TMS. Hiring her turned out to be one of the smartest things that I ever did. That was the end of awkward conversations with people who didn't get it and the beginning of being helped and heard. In a book called Changing for Good, a group of psychologists mapped out how people make real and lasting change, especially when there's no quick fix. And what they found is that change happens in 6 stages, and it doesn't move forward in a straight line. People go forward, they move back, they move forward again. When I first read it, I felt like it described my experience with tinnitus perfectly. Everything that I had been through trying to habituate. The 5th stage that they describe, called maintenance, it's not a finish line. It's just a place that you keep returning to. Relapse is part of the process, and sometimes it even helps. So if you're having a setback, that doesn't mean that you're back at 0. If you've habituated before, even a little, then you've already done this before. And that means you can do it again. One of the things my coach did was encourage me to do something that I thought was kind of cheesy, which was gratitude lists. Even if all I could write was, I have a warm bed to sleep in. I was skeptical, but I figured, why not? She was right. It didn't work overnight, but over time, what I started to notice changed. Every evening, I had to sit back and look over my day and find something good. Eventually, I started noticing things during the day and thinking, oh, cool, that's another thing that I can put in my gratitude list tonight. And I started looking for those things. It became a habit, and slowly my outlook changed. I wasn't fully there yet, but I was becoming more optimistic. During my 2nd year with tinnitus, I hit a wall. I was overwhelmed, depressed, isolated, and completely burned out. I'd always been introverted with a pretty small circle of friends, and I knew that something had to change. I'd always loved badminton, so I found a group on Meetup, and I joined. I was anxious. Loud gyms were the perfect kind of situation for making my tinnitus spike. But I went, and I made myself talk to new people every time I went. Every time, the noise would spike, but I kept going, and pretty soon I started getting invited to other events. I forced myself to meet new people every time, and it started to feel good. I realized that refocusing didn't have to be work. It didn't have to be just out walking. It could be fun. So I was going hours at a time without noticing the noise. And the more that happened, the less I worried about that noise. And the less I worried about it, the less I cared about what it was doing. I had other shit to do. So these days, I sleep through the night without any problems. I don't hear the noise most of the time. I don't need to drown it in beer anymore. I go to metal shows again, just like I always did before. I made it through arguably the world's most brutal COVID lockdown without any issues related to tinnitus. And really, my life is richer now than it was before I had the tinnitus. The sound's still technically there. I can hear it right now as I talk about this, but it doesn't bother me. I really don't care. I know that 5 minutes from now, I'll be focused on something else, and it will effectively not be there. That's not a miracle. That's training. And if you've been stuck in a fear spiral the way I was about this, you can train too. If my story has helped you in any way, please do like this video, subscribe. More is coming. Have a good one, y'all.